They walked past him every morning without a glance. Some avoided eye contact. Some laughed behind his back. Others made faces mimicking his slow walk and trembling hands. To them, he was just an old man with a mop. No one asked his name. Number one cared to know where he came from. In that massive government building, full of smart uniforms and polished shoes, he was the invisible one, just the janitor. But not everyone ignored him. There was one small boy, maybe 10 or 11, who came with his mother every Saturday. She worked in admin and had no one to watch her son. So, the boy brought his books, a snack, and sat quietly in the break room. One morning, he ran through the hallway with a cup of coffee meant for his mom. He slipped. The cup flew from his hands, landed with a loud splash, and the coffee soaked the marble floor. The boy froze. No one was nearby. He looked around in panic. Then came the soft tap of slow footsteps. The janitor appeared, pushing his old mop bucket with a squeaky wheel. Without saying a word, he knelt, not bothering to use the mop yet. He pulled a cloth from his pocket and began dabbing the boy's pants, then the floor. "It's okay," he whispered, eyes gentle. "No need to cry." The boy hadn't realized tears were falling. "I didn't mean to." The janitor gave a slight smile. "I know." The boy's eyes fell on the man's arm as the sleeve rolled up slightly. There was a faint, strange mark, not like a normal tattoo, almost like a burn. The boy tilted his head, curious. But before he could ask, the janitor finished cleaning and nodded once before walking away. That night, the boy told his mom about the janitor and the mark. She laughed softly. "I didn't even know we had a janitor. At work, people rarely noticed him. And when they did, it wasn't kind. Old man should retire already. Probably here for the pension. Bet he was never anything special." The janitor heard it all. He just didn't react. He arrived every day before sunrise, and left after the last person went home. He cleaned without complaints, without thanks, and without breaks longer than a few minutes. But one person did notice. Ramon, young, sharp-eyed, and proud. Ramon had grown up in a military family. He knew discipline, order, and respect. And for some reason, he began watching the janitor. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. He once saw the man lift a heavy marble planter with one hand when others struggled with two. He moved slowly, yes, but with a certain precision, like someone trained. Ramon began to feel that there was more to the janitor than anyone realized. He started observing his routine. Every day, the janitor paused at exactly 0600 in front of the flag in the main lobby. He'd stand straight, like at attention, for exactly 60 seconds. No one else noticed, but Ramon did. He started asking around. "What's that mark on his arm?" No one knew. "What's his name?" "Don't remember." "Does HR have his file?" "He's a contractor. Outsourced. We barely have records." Ramon's curiosity grew deeper. He pulled security footage. The janitor avoided cameras well, but not on purpose. It was as if it came naturally, like someone trained to stay out of sight. Then one morning, while reviewing some old photographs in the archive room, Ramon froze. In a faded group photo from decades ago, soldiers, standing proud in uniform, he spotted a young man in the center. The eyes, the jawline, the silent strength. It was him, the janitor. But the name listed was not the one on the contractor's file. It read, Lt. Co. H. Saeed. Operation Ghostfire, 1979. Ramon couldn't believe it. Operation Ghostfire had long been whispered about. A failed mission, a wiped-out team. A story the government denied. No survivors. The file had said. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then his eyes moved to the man's arm. The same strange mark, burned into the skin. Ramon's breath caught in his throat. He printed the photo and slipped it into his coat pocket. That day he saw the janitor exchanging near the elevators. Ramon paused. "Excuse me, sir?" The janitor looked up, mildly surprised. Few ever spoke to him politely. "Do you know a man named Saeed?" A flicker in the eyes, a pause. Then he resumed mopping. Ramon stepped closer. "Because I think you are him." No reply. Just silence. The mop moved slowly across the floor. Ramon leaned in. "You're a soldier. I saw your photo in the archives. You served. You were a leader." The janitor stopped, looked up, and said only, "That man died a long time ago." Then turned away. That night, Ramon couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the photo. The date, the operation, the names, all gone, erased from history. But why? Who was this man? What had he done to become a ghost? The next morning, the boy came running again, this time with a drawing. It was of the janitor holding a sword like a warrior. The boy handed it shyly. "You look like a hero." The janitor smiled for the first time, a real smile, then patted the boy's head. "Heroes don't mop floors," he whispered, "but I like your drawing." Later that day, the janitor had a coughing fit in the restroom. Ramon followed him in, concerned. "Are you okay?" The janitor nodded, but his hands trembled. Ramon looked down. The old burn mark on his arm was clearer, now almost like an emblem. "What is that mark?" Ramon asked. The janitor was silent. "It's not just a tattoo, it's a code, isn't it?" The janitor slowly rolled down his sleeve. "You're asking questions no one dares to ask anymore. Then, tell me the truth." The janitor turned. locking eyes with him. Are you ready for it? At that exact moment, the building's fire alarm rang out. Emergency lights blinked. People shouted. Smoke began to pour in from the eastern corridor. Panic spread. People ran in every direction. Ramon reached for his radio. Security, respond. We need guidance, but the line was dead. Just then, the janitor moved. Calmly, swiftly, he pulled the fire axe from the wall, broke open the emergency door, and shouted, "This way." Without waiting, he led the crowd down a side stairwell, guiding them past blocked passages and through safe exits. Ramon followed, watching, stunned. The old man moved like a trained responder, quick, direct, precise. He kicked open doors, lifted fallen shelves, calmed children, and gave clear orders. Finally, when everyone was safe outside, he collapsed to his knees, coughing hard. Ramon helped him up. "How did you?" The janitor whispered. "Oh, habits, they don't die." As paramedics arrived and people gave statements, a senior officer approached who led the evacuation. Everyone pointed at the janitor, but when they turned, he was gone, slipped away. Ramon searched everywhere, only to find the mop bucket sitting in the middle of the hallway, the wheels still spinning. That night, Ramon sat alone with the photo and a question burning in his heart. What else is he hiding? The next morning, something even stranger happened. The building was filled with talk. "Did you see him? That old man saved us. He knew exactly what to do. I think he used to be military." But in the break room, someone whispered, "He shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." That whisper was loud enough to reach the janitor's ears. And yet, he didn't flinch. Instead, he quietly mopped the floor, as though nothing had changed. But everything had, especially for Lieutenant Ramon, who now had one mission: only discover the truth behind the mark on that man's arm. The next morning, everything felt the same on the outside, but something small had shifted. People still walked past the old janitor without a glance. His name tag read Mr. Haroun, but nobody cared to read it. Most simply called him old man or just barked, "Hey, clean this up." No one saw how tired his eyes looked. No one noticed the careful way he folded his mop cloth, or how his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. But someone was looking now. Lieutenant Ahmed stood at a distance in the cafeteria, his arms crossed, his mind replaying what he had seen the day before. That mark, that strange faded tattoo on the janitor's arm, it wasn't something one found in a regular tattoo shop. He had seen it before, an old black and white photo, in a military book his grandfather once showed him. The mark wasn't just a drawing, it was a unit insignia, a special one. From a team that officially didn't exist. Ahmed's curiosity was no longer casual. It had turned into a need. A puzzle had appeared right in the middle of the base, wearing a janitor's uniform and walking slowly with a mop in hand. Ahmed decided not to act too fast. Instead, he started asking quiet questions. "Hey," he said to Corporal Billow, "how long has that old janitor been here?" Billow shrugged. "Dunno, years maybe. He was already here when I joined. Never speaks much. Does his job. Keeps to himself." "Anyone know where he lives?" "Nope. He just shows up and leaves." "You'd think he sleeps in the walls or something." Ahmed smiled slightly but didn't laugh. "What about his background check? You ever seen it?" Belial shook his head. "Not my department." Ahmed thanked him and walked away. He could have used his authority to pull up the janitor's file immediately, but something stopped him. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was the way Mr. Haroun had acted during the fire.com fast smarter than any janitor should have been in a crisis. That afternoon, Ahmed went to the admin desk and pretended he needed the background files of all base workers for a safety audit. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. When the folder for Mr. Haroun came up, Ahmed opened it and paused. The file was thin, too thin. Name: Haroun Khan, age, unknown, estimated 70s, position, janitorial staff, start date, 2013, emergency contact, none, education, unknown, previous experience, not listed. That was it. No birth certificate, no ID number, no photograph from earlier years, nothing else. Ahmed frowned. He had seen this kind of file before, not in janitor folders, but in declassified intelligence reports. This wasn't a normal employee file, it was cleaned. That night, Ahmed sat alone in his small office. The rest of the base was quiet. Rain tapped softly on the windows. He pulled out an old military history book from his shelf. He flipped through pages, past stories of known heroes and forgotten wars. Then, he saw it a page with no name, only a blurred image of soldiers and masks. And there, in the center, was that same tattoo. Exactly the same dot. He took a photo of the page and compared it to the image in his head from the fire. The match was perfect. Meanwhile, across the base, Mr. Haroun quietly locked up the janitor's closet. He wiped his hands on his pants and walked slowly down the corridor. His back ached. His knees were stiff. But his mind was sharp. He had noticed the change in the air. People looking at him differently. Whispers when he passed. Someone had seen it. The Marquis sighed and made his way to the far back of the base, where few people ever went. There, hidden behind old storage cabinets, was a rusted door. He pulled out a tiny key from his pocket, one no one knew he still had. He opened the door and stepped into a dark, abandoned room. Inside were a few crates, a dusty chair, and a small, metal box. He opened the box carefully. Inside was an old photograph, torn and creased. 5 young soldiers stood together, their faces hard but proud. In the middle, without a helmet, was a young man with strong eyes and a confident smirk. Mr. Haroon, he touched the photo gently. Outside the room, footsteps passed. He waited, they faded. Back in his office, Ahmed was on a video call with his uncle, a retired intelligence officer. You said you recognized a mark? His uncle asked. Yes, on a janitor. Here, on base. I found this photo too, Ahmed said, holding up the image. The older man's eyes narrowed. That's not just any mark, that's Unit 9S. Ahmed blinked. I've never heard of that. You weren't supposed to, the uncle said quietly. 9S was a shadow unit, formed after the 1971 crisis. Top missions only. No names, no medals. Most didn't survive long enough to retire. They were silent protectors. What happened to them? Officially, they never existed. Unofficially, they were used, then buried. One went rogue after his whole team was wiped out, killed the ones responsible, then disappeared. Ahmed leaned back, stunned. Do you think? I think you found a ghost, his uncle said. Back in the staff quarters, the young boy from the cafeteria listened, talking to his friend. You know that old janitor guy? He's not just a janitor. My cousin saw him move like lightning when the fire alarm went off. His friend laughed. He's just old, probably panicked. No man, he wasn't scared, he was like, in control. Just then, Mr. Haroon passed by, carrying a mop bucket. The kids fell silent. Ali stood and ran toward him. Sir, he said nervously, can I help you with something? Mr. Haroon looked at him, surprised. No one had ever asked that before. You want to help? Clean, he asked, voice soft. Ali nodded. I think you're kind. The janitor smiled. Just a little, thank you, he said, and continued walking. Behind him, the other boy whispered, why did you call him sir? He's just a janitor. Ali turned. No, he's not. I think he was something else, something big. The next morning, Ahmed tried to talk to Mr. Haroon. Sir, can I have a word? But Mr. Haroon simply nodded politely and kept walking. Ahmed followed. That mark, on your arm. I've seen it before. Mr. Haroon stopped. Not many alive today would recognize that, he said without turning around. So it's true, Ahmed asked. The janitor looked over his shoulder, his eyes cold. Some truths don't need to be remembered. They only bring pain. But why hide? Because when the war ended, people forgot who bled for their peace. Ahmed said nothing, but Mr. Haroon walked away, slowly, like the weight of years pressed on his shoulders. But for a brief second, Ahmed saw something in his walk, not weakness, but restraint. Like a tiger choosing not to roar. That evening, a group of new officers laughed in the lounge. You hear the story. One chuckled. Apparently our janitor was some kind of secret agent. Maybe next week he'll fly a jet. Another joked. They all laughed. In the hallway, Mr. Haroon passed by, silent as always, but his ears heard every word. He said nothing. But inside, the old fire stirred. Later that night, lightning flashed in the sky. Rain poured hard. On base, the lights flickered. Power outage. Alarms blared. Security breach. Came the voice over the intercom. Unauthorized vehicle near the rear fence. All officers report. People scrambled. Confusion filled the air. Ahmed grabbed his gear and ran toward the gate. In the shadows, someone had already moved before the alarm rang. A figure climbed over the fence. Too fast to be a normal intruder, but before he landed, a mop handle hit his leg from nowhere. He crashed to the ground. The intruder tried to rise, but an old hand pinned his arm down and twisted it. The man screamed by the time the guards arrived. They found Mr. Haroon calmly standing over the man, who lay groaning in pain. Found your guest? He said, eyes calm. Everyone stared. How did you? Some instincts never sleep, he replied. Ahmed looked at the unconscious intruder, then back at the janitor. Now, there was no doubt. This was not a janitor. This was something else. Someone else. Someone the world had forgotten, but not for long. The janitor's tiny room at the edge of the old military building was quiet that night. The only sound was the ticking of a dusty wall clock. The man known to everyone as Old Mac lay curled on his narrow bed, his hands trembling gently in sleep. But in his dream, he wasn't sleeping. In his dream, the ground was shaking. Helicopters roared overhead. Gunfire cracked like thunder, and men screamed all around him. He was no longer old. He was young, alert, eyes sharp behind a layer of dirt and sweat. His hands clutched a rifle. Blood ran down his cheek. He was running now, limping, dragging another soldier on his back. Mac, leave me. The voice screamed. I won't. Mac shouted back in the dream. A fireball exploded in the distance, throwing both of them into the air. The soldier's helmet flew off, and Mac landed hard, but didn't let go. Then silence, then a face. A masked enemy stared down at him, blade drawn. Mac reached for something under his shirt. He pulled out a dull silver object, and everything turned white. Mac gasped awake, sweat pouring down his face. His chest rose and fell fast. His fingers clenched his bedsheet like a man gripping the edge of a cliff. He sat up slowly, his eyes dazed. He looked down at his arm. That mark, still there, still burning. He touched it gently, as if it might disappear. Mac slowly got out of bed and walked to the old closet in the corner. It creaked open. Behind a pile of mops and folded shirts was a small wooden box, worn out by time. He took it out, sat at the edge of his bed, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a military medal with a dark blue ribbon, dusty but untouched. By time next to it was a torn black and white photo. The photo showed 6 young men in uniform. Their faces were serious, but proud. One of them, in the center, stood a little taller than the others. His eyes were sharp, his hands behind his back, his sleeves rolled up just enough to show the start of that strange mark. The same mark Mac now had on his old, wrinkled arm. He stared at the photo for a long time. His finger gently traced the image of the young man he used to be. That night, he didn't sleep again. The next morning, Mac was already mopping the east hallway before anyone else arrived. He moved slowly but steadily, as always. He didn't speak, he never did. Lieutenant Harris passed him but didn't speak either. But this time his eyes followed the old man as he moved. His thoughts were filled with the memory of that mark, so similar to one he had seen long ago in a secret photo during his training. Harris couldn't let it go. Later that day, Harris sat in his office and pulled open an old drawer. Inside was a locked box marked classified. He opened it and took out a dusty file labeled Project Osprey. Inside, he flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for, a black and white photo. 6 soldiers, same uniforms, same formation, and in the middle, the same young man, sharp eyes, rolled sleeves, same mark, no name listed, just a code name Shadow 3. Harris stared at the photo for a long time. Could it really be the janitor? The same face? The same aura? The same mark? That it couldn't be a coincidence. He made a call. Meanwhile, in the break room, 2 young officers were joking loudly, I heard that old janitor once tried to join the army but got kicked out. One laughed. Yeah, right. The other chuckled. He looks like he couldn't even carry a lunch tray. They laughed harder. A young recruit nearby looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Just then, Mac entered the room to empty the trash. The laughter stopped. For a second, everyone went quiet. Then one of the officers smirked. Hey, old man, he said loudly. Want to tell us about your war stories? Mac didn't answer. He simply lifted the trash bag, tied it carefully, and left. The young recruit stood up and followed him out. Sir? He asked gently. Mac stopped. I don't believe what they say. You helped my little brother when he got lost here last week. You didn't say anything, but thank you. Mac nodded once and kept walking. But for the first time, the young recruit noticed something odd. The way Mac walked. Not like an old man with weak legs, but like someone trained to move silently and efficiently that night. Mac stood outside under the moonlight, behind the maintenance shed. He wasn't cleaning. He was moving. Quietly, slowly. He slipped off his janitor uniform and stood in a plain shirt and trousers. Then, with perfect posture, he began a series of precise, graceful, martial movements. His arms flowed like water. His feet were balanced. Every motion seemed to slice the air. A shadow watched from behind the shed. It was the same young recruit. His eyes widened in shock. Who was this man? The next morning, Harris received a return call from an old contact in the intelligence department. Lieutenant Harris, the voice said cautiously, I strongly suggest you forget what you saw. But the man in the janitor's closet has the mark, the same one, and the face matches Shadow 3. That mark isn't just decoration, the voice replied. It's a seal. For people who went on missions that technically don't exist. Then why is he here, sweeping floors? That's the part we were never told, the voice said. But if he's hiding, there's a reason. What was Shadow 3's real name? Classified, erased. Even we don't have it. Click. The call ended. Back in the hallways, Mac quietly continued his work. A few people now gave him polite nods. Some avoided him, some were still rude. But Lieutenant Harris was no longer uncertain. He walked up to Mac during lunch hour. Sir? He said, quietly, I'd like a word. Mac didn't look up. He kept sweeping. I think we both know you're not just a janitor. No response. Shadow 3, Harris said. Testing. Mac froze. Then slowly looked up. Their eyes met. Neither said a word. Then Mac walked away. Slowly Harris stood there, stunned. That silence confirmed everything. That night, in the same quiet room, Mac stared at the photo again. But this time, he pulled out a smaller piece of paper from under the metal. A letter. Old, wrinkled but untouched. Dear Captain MacArthur. It began his real name. Not Mac. Not old man. But Captain Elijah MacArthur. The letter read, Your mission will never be known. Your actions will never be recognized. But without you, millions would not have lived. The nation thanks you quietly, and forever. Signed, General R.A. Simmons. Mac folded the letter and placed it back in the box. His hands trembled not from age, but from memory. Outside, a black car slowly passed by the gate. Inside sat a man. In a gray suit, no badge, no expression. He glanced at a photo of the janitor on his phone. Found you, he whispered. Then the car drove away. The black car returned the next day, this time without headlights. It parked across the street from the military training center, hidden behind a long hedge. A man in a gray suit stepped out, blending into the shadows. He looked up at the building. Silently inside, Captain Elijah MacArthur, known to all as Mac, the janitor, continued his nightly duty. He swept the halls with the same quiet discipline he had for years. He didn't know the man had returned, not yet, but he felt something, call it instinct, call it an old soldier's gift. He paused by the stairwell. His hand tightened around the mop handle. Outside, the man in gray looked at a watch and spoke quietly into a tiny earpiece. Target confirmed. Proceeding. At 2:11 a.m., the side alarm on the base flickered for half a second. No sound, just a flicker. Mac noticed it. He moved, not fast, just with purpose. He put the mop down. He took off his work gloves and slipped into the shadows between the lockers. At that same moment, two men in black entered from the fire exit on the east wing. Quiet, clean, smooth. Not thieves, not vandals. Professionals. One held a device that scrambled nearby cameras. The other pulled out a photo, Mac, taken from a distance. Underneath was the label, Target, Shadow, 3 possible alias. Mac. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They split up, one moving toward the boiler room, the other toward the janitor's quarters. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Harris was lying awake in bed. He'd barely slept since seeing the mark on Mac's arm. Questions haunted him. Who was this man really? What had he done to earn that tattoo? Why was someone so skilled, sweeping floors? But then he remembered something from the classified file. Erased identity, strategic exile, voluntary silence. That meant this man chose to disappear. And if he had, why? And more importantly, was it safe for him to still be here? Suddenly Harris's phone buzzed. A silent message from base security. Brief camera disruption in East Hallway. No motion detected. Investigating. Harris sat up. His gut twisted. He threw on his jacket and headed to the control room. Down in the lower hallway. The first intruder reached the janitor's room. He opened the door slowly. Empty. He stepped inside. The old bed, the broom, the uniform, everything was just as expected, but he didn't notice the tiny mirror positioned above the door. It reflected his every move. Mac was watching, from above, like a ghost in his own building. He moved like he hadn't moved in decades. Every step calculated, every corner scanned. He knew this place better than anyone. He had cleaned every inch of it. He dropped silently from the maintenance hatch above, and took the man down before a whisper could escape his lips. The body crumpled. Mac tied him quickly and dragged him behind the storage shelves. Then he turned toward the second intruder. He already knew where he was headed. Lieutenant Harris reached the control room. The guard on duty rubbed his eyes. Sir, what's wrong? Show me the East Wing cameras. All of them, sir. There was just a flicker. No alert, I said now. The guard nodded and pulled up the feeds. Harris's eyes narrowed. 2-second blackout, then grainy footage, but it was enough. A shadow entered through the fire door, and one hallway camera caught partial shot. A man in black holding a photo. Harris leaned in. He saw the edge of Mac's face on the picture. No, Harris whispered. He turned to the guard. Lock down the East Wing, full alert, and call back up now. The second intruder had reached the boiler room. He crouched behind the panel, waiting. His earpiece buzzed once. No answered from his partner. He frowned and stood up, and found himself staring into the eyes of the janitor. Mac stood there, calm, firm, his hands empty. You shouldn't have come, Mac said softly. The intruder reached for his weapon, but Mac had already moved in 2 swift motions. He disarmed the man and flipped him over a pipe. The man groaned. Who sent you? Mac asked. Silence. Then footsteps echoed behind them. Mac turned. Lieutenant Harris stood at the door, flanked by 2 young officers. Their weapons were raised. Stand down, Harris shouted. Mac raised his hands slowly. The intruder on the floor, cuffed. He's the one. He's dangerous. We were told, he snapped. Mac shook his head. That's a lie. Then explain the mark, Harris demanded. Mac sighed. Then, slowly, he pulled up his sleeve and exposed the symbol on his arm. It was faded but clear. A strange triangle wrapped around a falcon. Inside the falcon, the number 3. Harris lowered his weapon. That's not just a tattoo, he said. That's a ghost unit emblem. Mac nodded. I didn't snap, Mac said quietly. I disappeared because I was told to. I cleaned floors because I needed peace. Not fame, not war, just peace. Then who are these men? Harris asked. I don't know, Mac said. But someone doesn't want me to exist anymore. By sunrise, the base was under full internal investigation. The 2 intruders were handed over to military intelligence. They refused to speak when pressed. One finally said, we were told he was unstable, that he had secrets, that he might expose something. What secrets? The investigator asked. We don't know. We were paid in crypto, hired anonymously. Meanwhile, Max stood outside, watching the sunrise over the training grounds. Lieutenant Harris approached him slowly. You should have told me who you were, Harris said. Mac didn't look at him. I stopped being that man years ago. You saved this base last night. You neutralized trained agents without a single shot fired. I just used what I remembered. You remember a lot. Mac turned to him. Now do you understand why I stayed hidden? I didn't want to be remembered. I wanted to be forgotten. Harris nodded. But some marks can't be erased. Mac gave a small smile. I know. He started walking away. Where are you going? Harris asked. Back to work. The mess hall floors are still sticky. But the story didn't end there. In a hidden office far from the base, a tall man in a dark suit watched a live feed of the entire incident. He turned to his assistant. He's still sharp. Too sharp. Do you want him taken out? The man shook his head. No. Let him be for now. He paused. But keep watching. If he talks, we act. The assistant nodded. That evening, Harris walked into the janitor's closet. Mac was sitting, silently, polishing his old mop. Harris sat beside him. Do you ever miss it? He asked. Mac didn't answer right away. Then he said, I miss the brothers, not the battles. Harris nodded. Then he reached into his pocket. I found this in the archive. He handed Mac a folded newspaper clipping. It showed a burning village and, under it, unknown hero saves 200 lives during unreported conflict. Mac stared at it, then carefully folded it again. He placed it in his wooden box beside the photo. You're not unknown anymore, Harris said. I'd rather be, Mac replied softly. Then he stood, and once again he went back to sweeping the floors. Like always, but now everyone watched him a little differently. For the first time in many years, the soldiers at the base looked at Mac differently. They no longer just saw a janitor. They saw the man behind the broom, the man who took down 2 trained intruders without a weapon, the man who had a mysterious past, a mark on his arm, and a history deeper than the walls of their entire building. But for Mac, nothing had changed. He still came to work at 6 a.m. Exactly, he still swept the halls like he had for over a decade. He still sat quietly during lunch, eating alone in the corner of the cafeteria, facing the wall. He didn't speak unless spoken to. But now, whispers followed him. The mocking kind, the curious kind, private. Bennett was one of the first to break the silence. He walked over to Mac one afternoon while Mac was mopping the floor outside the gym. So you mean, Mac, I just wanted to say thank you. Mac didn't stop mopping. For what? For saving the base? I didn't save the base, Mac said calmly. I stopped 2 foolish men from doing damage. The rest of you protect this place every day. That's more important. Bennett hesitated. Still, if you ever want to tell us your story, I'd love to hear it. Mac looked up at him, then down again. Some stories are better left folded in drawers, he replied. Then he turned and pushed the mop forward, but inside his drawer, under the folded newspaper clipping, another story was starting to unfold. Late one night, when the base was quiet, Mac opened his old wooden box and pulled out a faded photograph. 3 men stood together. In military uniforms, dust covered their boots. Their faces were hard, but their eyes showed something deeper: pain, loyalty. Lost. Mac stared at the man in the middle, the one with the dark eyes and tight jaw. Captain Jonah Hale, his best friend, his brother in arms, dead for years, now officially declared missing in action. But Mac knew the truth. Jonah didn't go missing. Jonah was left behind, and Mac never forgave himself. The next morning, Lieutenant Harris visited Mac's closet again. He brought coffee. Mac raised an eyebrow. Coffee doesn't fix everything, son. I know, Harris said, sitting beside him. But maybe it helps start something. Mac took the cup without a smile. They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Harris spoke again. I asked intelligence about your old unit. They said the files are sealed under level 9 clearance. They should stay that way. They also said only 3 people from that unit are confirmed alive. Mac didn't reply. Were you one of the 3? Mac sipped his coffee. I was the last. What happened? Mac placed the cup down slowly. I broke orders. I saved people I wasn't supposed to save. Civilians, children. But in doing that, I left someone behind. I failed someone who trusted me. Who? Captain Jonah Hale. Harris froze. The same Jonah Hale who was part of the Tehran extraction mission. Yes, that mission. That was supposed to be a rescue of diplomats. It was, Mac said, until it turned into a bloodbath. Back in the main office, strange things were happening. The 2 captured intruders had been transferred to a higher security facility. But during the transport, the convoy lost contact for 9 minutes. When it reconnected, both prisoners were gone. Vanished. The vehicle was abandoned, its doors wide open. A small slip of paper was left on the seat. It read, "Shadows die in light." Lieutenant Harris brought the note to Mac. He read it without blinking, then nodded. They're cleaning up? Who? Harris asked. The people who created us. You mean ... The ghost unit. Mac looked at him directly. No, ghosts were just tools. I'm talking about the people who gave the orders. The ones who stayed in clean offices while we bled in the sand. They're tying loose ends, and I'm the last thread. Then we need to protect you. Mac shook his head. No, you need to protect them, he said, gesturing to the base full of young soldiers. I can take care of myself, but they came for you once. They'll come again. I'm counting on it. 3 days later, Mac received a letter. No name, just a symbol. The triangle and falcon, the same one on his arm. Inside a single sentence, Jonah is alive. His hands trembled. He hadn't trembled in years. That night, Mac didn't sleep. He sat alone in his room, reading the letter again and again. Jonah is alive. It didn't make sense. He saw Jonah fall, heard the explosion, saw the collapsed building. He blamed himself for leaving him there. He lived with that guilt every day. So this wasn't possible. Unless Jonah had been taken, unless someone wanted him to disappear, and if they had The next morning, Mac asked to speak with Colonel Darnell, the base commander. The colonel was skeptical but respected Mac. "What's this about, son?" "I need clearance to visit the DC Vault archives." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "That level of access doesn't come easy. I think I've earned it." The colonel nodded. "I'll make the call." Meanwhile, Harris dug deeper. He found an old report buried in the base database, a partial communication log from a mission, codenamed Operation Ashfall. The last words in the transcript were, "If we leave now, we lose Jonah. Then we lose him. Orders are orders." The officer who gave that final order, Brigadier General Victor Kane, now retired but still very powerful. Mac flew to DC alone. Inside the cold vault of government secrets, he searched through black pages and burned edges. He found Jonah's final mission file, except his death wasn't confirmed. It simply said, "Status, undisclosed, asset redirected." Asset. Jonah was a human being. Mac stepped back, heart pounding. Someone had lied. Someone had used Jonah. And now, someone was warning Mac, or challenging him. Thus Mac left the archives. He noticed a car following him. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He just walked into an alley. The car stopped. A man stepped out. "Captain MacArthur," he said. "Don't use that name. You were warned to stay silent. And you were warned to leave soldiers behind. Seems we both broke rules." The man smiled coldly. "You're digging into things that were buried for a reason. Where's Jonah?" The man didn't answer. So Mac stepped forward. "Tell whoever sent you. I'm not the janitor anymore." Then he grabbed the man's lapel and whispered, "I'm coming for everyone who lied to me." Back at the base, Harris received a photo in an unmarked envelope. It was old, faded, but clear enough. It showed Jonah, hale, alive, sitting in a dark room with wires behind him, and behind Jonah, a symbol, not the falcon, not the triangle, but a black sun. The symbol of a secret program. Long thought shutdown code name. Black Rain. Harris rushed to meet Mac, only to find him already back. He handed him the photo. Mac looked at it for a long time. Then with quiet fire in his voice, he said, "They didn't just erase Jonah. They reprogrammed him." The air at the base felt heavier now. The tension wasn't just in the halls or the conference rooms, it was inside every young soldier who had seen the quiet janitor change into something else. A warrior, a mystery, a man with a secret that could shake the entire system. Mac hadn't said much since he returned from DC, but everyone could tell something inside him had changed. His shoulders were a little straighter, his eyes a little sharper, and his silence no longer felt like submission. It felt like waiting for war, for truth, or for both. Lieutenant Harris kept looking at the photo of Jonah, the friend Mac thought he'd lost years ago. He couldn't get the image out of his head. Jonah strapped to a chair, eyes dull, as if he had forgotten who he was. The black sun symbol on the wall behind him made Harris shiver. "I thought that program was shut down," he said aloud. Mac didn't look at him. "They shut it down on paper, but things like that, they never really die. They just go deeper underground." Harris stepped closer. "Then what now?" Mac finally turned to him. "We find Jonah, and we burn that place down." Back at the Pentagon, Colonel Darnell was fighting his own battle. He had put in a request to reopen Operation Ashfall, something no one had done in over 10 years. But the moment he submitted the file, his screen went black. A red message appeared. "Access denied. Classified under Black Rain protocol." Darnell cursed. He picked up the phone and dialed an old number. It rang 6 times before someone answered. "You're not supposed to call this line." The voice said, "You said if I ever saw the mark again, I should call." Darnell replied. There was silence. Then described the mark. Triangle, falcon, right forearm, left by acid burn. Subject codename, Ironwind. Another pause. Then the voice said, "Where is he?" "Here, but he's waking up, and he's not happy." 3 days later, Mac disappeared. He left no message. His map, always hung neatly in the janitor's closet, was gone. Harris found the door unlocked, the light flickering on the wall. Scratched in chalk was a single word: sever. What Harris didn't know was that Mac had taken the fight. Underground, he used old contacts, code names only, payphones, dead drops, maps printed on real paper. He was chasing a ghost, and the ghost was leading him toward the Black Rain facility. The last known location, somewhere near a desert airfield outside Nevada. No markings, no fences, just a hole in the ground and a fake building on top. A place not even satellites could find easily. Mac remembered the place from years ago. He had visited it once, back when he was still Captain MacArthur, before the world turned him into a janitor inside the facility. Jonah Hale wasn't the man, Mac remembered. He had been through years of psychological conditioning. He'd been told Mac betrayed him, told that his past life was a lie. His mind had been scrubbed, broken, and rebuilt. And now, Jonah had a new name, Echo-7. He didn't know Mac. He didn't remember the war, or the children they rescued, or the night Mac refused to leave him. But deep inside, something in Jonah's eyes was starting to flicker. Something familiar. Mac arrived at the airfield during a thunderstorm. He walked toward the hangar, dragging a metal case behind him. A man in a black suit met him. Turn around. This area is restricted. Mac didn't speak. He opened the metal case. Inside an old military tag, Jonah Hales. The man frowned. Where did you get that? I'm here for my brother, Mac said. Then he moved faster than the man could react, knocking him out cold. Mac stepped over the body and pushed open the hidden door inside the hangar. The elevator was still there, underground, where monsters hid. He went down. Meanwhile, at the base, Harris received a coded transmission. Encrypted. But the signature on it was clear. Iron Wind. The message read, if I don't come back in 24 hours, follow the trail. Bring fire. Harris knew what that meant. Mac was going in alone. He might not make it out. Harris slammed his fist on the desk. No, not this time. He stood and turned to his squad. We're going to Nevada. Inside the Black Rain facility, alarms began to go off. Bach had breached the lower level. Guards rushed toward him, but he moved like a ghost, like the man he used to be. Every move was precise, every takedown silent. He made it to the chamber labeled E7. Inside Jonah, strapped down, monitors attached to his chest, a mask over his mouth. Bach stared at him through the glass. Jonah, he whispered. Jonah didn't move. Max slammed the door open and ran inside. He ripped the mask off. Jonah opened his eyes, blank. Don't you remember me? Max said. Silence. Then, in a cold robotic voice, Jonah said, you left me. Max's heart cracked. I came back for you. Jonah stood and punched Max so hard he flew across the room. Security rushed in. Mac tried not to fight back against Jonah, but Jonah wasn't holding back. They fought like titans. Metal clanged glass, shattered. But as they fought, Jonah began to remember the swing of Mac's arm, the scar on his cheek, the sound of his voice yelling orders in the night. Memories crashed through his mind like a broken dam. Jonah dropped to his knees. Mac, he whispered, then collapsed. Harris and his team arrived just as the ground started shaking. The base was going into lockdown. Explosives were being activated. A self-destruct sequence. Whoever ran Black Rain knew they'd been found. Mac dragged Jonah up the elevator shaft. He barely made it to the top as fire exploded below. They burst into the storm, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Harris caught them both. You brought him back, he said, amazed. No, Mac whispered. He came back on his own. They flew home in silence. Jonah was unconscious, but stable. Mac sat beside him, staring out the window. He wasn't a janitor. He was a soldier, a survivor, and now he had one mission left. Expose everything, burn the lies down, and make sure no one ever suffered like Jonah did again. Rain poured heavily on the windows of the military hospital. The wind howled like a warning, but inside room 214, everything was quiet. Jonah Hale lay unconscious on the hospital bed. Machines beeped steadily. Tubes fed medicine into his veins. His eyes twitched from time to time, like he was fighting something in his dreams. Mac sat beside him. His eyes never left Jonah's face. You were always the strong one, Mac whispered, even when we were just kids in boot camp. You carried me. You stood up for me. And when that program came for us, I let them take you. Mac wiped his eyes with a rough hand. I'm not running this time. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Harris stood in front of General Mendez. The room was full of senior officers. Thick silence filled the air. What you did, Mendez said slowly, was not approved. You took a team without orders. You invaded a classified facility. You nearly sparked a military-level incident on U.S. soil. Harris didn't blink. That facility wasn't supposed to exist. It was breaking every rule of the Geneva Convention. Dude, you have proof. Harris clicked a remote. The projector lit up. Images appeared. Jonah strapped down. The Black Rain logo, security logs, medical abuse files, all from Mac's flash drive. The officers gasped. One of them whispered, my God. Mendez stood. Who gave you this? Harris answered with one word. Mac? Everyone in the room turned cold. Silent. Someone finally asked. You mean the janitor? Harris stepped forward. I mean the man you all threw away. The man you disrespected for 20 years. The one who saved my life. And just saved this country from a secret war. Jonah finally opened his eyes 2 days later. Mac leaned over quickly. Jonah, you awake? Jonah blinked, confused. Where am I? You're safe? You're home. We made it out. Jonah turned his head. He looked much older now. His face was worn, like it had lived 2 lifetimes. But deep inside, his eyes carried that same spark. You came back for me. I never stopped trying, Mac whispered. Jonah's voice cracked. They told me you left me. They said you were the one who handed me over. I would have died before doing that, Mac said, but I couldn't stop them. I tried. They said you died in transport. I had no way to know. Jonah raised a shaky hand. It's okay. I believe you now. And with that, the 2 broken brothers held each other for the first time in decades. Outside the room, Harris was on the phone with a journalist. No, we're not giving names yet. he said, but we have everything. Locations, dates, victims. You'll get the full report in 48 hours. Just be ready. He hung up and turned to Darnell, who was standing stiff nearby. You knew, Harris said coldly, didn't you? Darnell didn't answer. Harris stepped closer. You could have stopped it. Darnell's jaw tightened. You think I didn't try? I submitted the request to terminate the program 5 times. Every time, it got buried. I was warned. You don't know what Black Rain really was. Then tell me. Darnell looked down. It wasn't just torture. It was mind control. Rewriting soldiers from the inside out. Turning war heroes into puppets. And now, the same people who ran it, they're still out there. Richer, more powerful, and furious that their secret's been exposed. Back in the hospital room, Mac helped Jonah sit up. Jonah looked out the window. How many did they take after me? Mac sighed. We don't know yet, but Harris is building a case. A big one. And your testimony could bring it all down. Jonah nodded. Slowly, then I'll do it. Just then, a nurse came in, newface.com voice. Mr. Hale, we need to check your 4. Mac stood to give space. But something about the nurse's movement felt off. Too stiff. Too fast. Suddenly Jonah gasped. Mac. Mac turned just as the nurse pulled out a small needle, sharp and glinting with green liquid. A poison. Mac tackled her instantly. The needle hit the wall. The nurse dropped the act and pulled a small blade, slashing at Mac. Blood appeared on his shoulder. Jonah tried to get out of bed, but his legs were still too weak. Mac wrestled her down and finally knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head, blood dripping down his arm. He stood, breathing hard. That wasn't a nurse. Security rushed in. Harris arrived seconds later. She's not in our system, one guard said. No ID, no prints, nothing. Assassin, Mac growled. They're already trying to silence him. Jonah nodded grimly. Then we hit them first. That night, Harris held a meeting. In the shadows of the base. Only 6 people were present. Soldiers, tech experts, whistleblowers, people who still believed in the truth. Harris placed the final pieces of the report on the table. I'm sending this to the Senate Intelligence Committee tomorrow morning. If we do this, there's no going back. Mac stepped forward. We've already gone too far to turn around. He paused. But before we go public, I have to finish something. Harris frowned. What? Mac looked down. There's one name not on that list. The man who created Black Rain. He didn't die in the fire. I saw him escape. Mac's voice was ice. Dr. Lang. Harris's eyes widened. That ghost? He disappeared a decade ago. I know where he's hiding, Mac said, and I'm going after him. The next morning, Jonah stood up for the first time. His body shook. His legs felt like rubber. But he stood. Mac helped him walk out of the hospital. They looked at the rising sun together. Jonah placed a hand on Mac's shoulder. Let's finish this. But unknown to them, in a hidden mansion in the mountains of Eastern Europe, a man watched. Their footage on a giant screen. Dr. Langstrom leaned forward. They've awakened him, he said calmly. He was never supposed to wake up. An assistant stepped forward. Shall I activate contingency? Langstrom nodded slowly. Yes, it's time to release the others. The others, sir? Langstrom smiled darkly. Project Ghostwind. Let's see how many of the forgotten still remember how to kill. It was dark when they reached the outskirts of Prague. Cold wind brushed against the windows of the black SUV. The lights of the city glittered below like a field of stars. But Mac wasn't looking at the view. He stared at the faded photograph. In his hands, him and Jonah in uniform, smiling before the mission that changed everything. Jonah sat beside him, silent but alert. His face was leaner now, sharper. The doctors said his muscles would take weeks to rebuild, but his eyes, they were full of fire. Lieutenant Harris drove quietly. No uniform, no badges. This mission wasn't official. It was personal. They were hunting a ghost. Dr. Langstrom. Mac had tracked him for years. Old files, canceled passports, burned clinics, false names, and now, finally, they had a lead. A mansion in the forest, owned by a shell company. Cameras showed armed guards. No children, no visitors. Just a long, winding road and one man who hadn't been seen in public for 12 years. That's where they were headed. But they weren't the only ones moving. In a steel bunker buried deep beneath the mountains, something stirred. A dim green light blinked on. A voice echoed through the hallway. Project Ghostwind. Activated. One by one, cold chambers opened with a hiss. Men stepped out silent, expressionless, tall, strong, identical scars on their forearms. They wore no uniforms. No names, just numbers. Each man was built like a weapon, lean muscle, a motionless face, eyes that had seen too much and remembered too little. An older man, in a long coat, walked through the hallway. Langstrom. He stood before them and smiled coldly. You've slept long enough, he said. Time to clean up the mess. Mac, Jonah, and Harris arrived at the edge of the forest. They parked the SUV behind the trees. No lights, no sound. Mac checked his weapon. Harris handed Jonah a comlink. Sure you want to do this? He asked. Jonah nodded. He owes me answers. They split up. Mac took the back path. Jonah and Harris crept toward the east fence. The mansion stood like a shell, cold and silent, but the silence didn't last long. Inside the mansion, Langstrom was watching the monitors. He saw them coming. He didn't panic. He simply pressed a button. In the lower level, doors unlocked. The Ghostwind soldiers moved into formation. Silent, deadly. Mac breached the west wall. 2 guards. He took them down quietly. He made his way through the garden, careful not to trigger sensors. He remembered Langstrom's habits, always booby traps, always overconfident. Jonah entered through the basement. The air smelled like metal and bleach. He froze when he saw each rows of medical beds. All empty tubes, blood bags, brainwave machines, and one wall, full of photos, dozens of faces. Jonah stared in horror. They were all like him. All test subjects, some he remembered vaguely. Others were just kids. He stepped closer and that's when he saw it. A photo labeled Patient Zero. It was him. Suddenly, the lights cut out. A soft click behind him. Jonah ducked just as a bullet missed his head. He rolled, grabbed a metal pole, and swung the attacker. A Ghostwind soldier blocked it easily. Jonah kicked, dodged, moved faster than he remembered he could, but the soldier wasn't human anymore. They fought in silence, trading blows. Jonah finally managed to slam the man into an electrical panel. The lights exploded back on. Jonah stood over the man's twitching body, breathing hard. Ghosts, he whispered. He made an army of ghosts. Mac reached the top floor. He found Langstrom in his study, calm, hands folded. I was wondering when you'd come. You always did like dramatics, Mac growled. Langstrom stood. You brought Jonah. I saw him on the cameras. Fascinating. Recovery? I was sure the neural damage was permanent. Mac aimed his gun. No more experiments. No more lies. Langstrom smiled. I never lied to you, Mac. I saved you. I gave you purpose. You stole our lives. I turned you into legends. You turned us into monsters. Langstrom's smile faded. You don't understand the world, Mac. Heroes are useful only when they're controllable. What I built? It was never for war. It was for peace. Controlled peace. Mac fired a warning shot into the wall. No more speeches. Where's the kill switch for the Ghostwind team? Langstrom laughed. There isn't one. Just then, the wall behind Mac exploded. A Ghostwind soldier charged. Mac fought hard, but he wasn't 20 anymore. He took a punch that threw him across the room. He struggled up dizzy, just in time to see Langstrom escaping through a hidden door. Jonah found Harris fighting 2 soldiers in the lower hall. They were surrounded. They don't feel pain, Harris shouted. Then we make them remember it, Jonah replied. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed one in the eyes. The soldier flinched. Jonah moved fast, slamming him into a wall and pulling off his helmet. Underneath the skin, metal cybernetic implants. Jonah muttered. There, half machine. Suddenly, Jonah had an idea. He reached into the soldier's neck and ripped out a glowing chip. The soldier dropped motionless. Jonah looked at Harris. Kill the signal. Kill the soldier. They moved quickly, disabling one after another, but the numbers kept coming. Mac chased Langstrom into a glass tunnel built over the cliffs. The wind howled below. Langstrom ran to a control panel. You can't stop progress, he shouted. Even if you kill me, the program lives. I'm not here to kill you, Mac said coldly. I'm here to erase you. He tackled Langstrom. The 2 old men fought in the rain, fists, blood, years of pain. Mac finally slammed Langstrom into the glass. Cracks appeared. Langstrom pulled a knife butt. Mac twisted it and sent it flying into the river below. Slumped, exhausted. You've ruined everything. Mac leaned in. No, I've finished it. Jonah and Harris made it to the server room. Jonah stared at the control hub, the same system that once controlled his brain. He touched it slowly. Felt cold. Then dash. He yanked the drives out, one by one. A loud alarm rang. Soldiers froze. The control chips shut down. They dropped like puppets with cut strings. Outside, the wind stopped. Inside, silence. Jonah stood alone in the room. Shaking but free. Hours later, the sun rose. The house was empty. Langstrom had been arrested. Mac stood at the cliffside, holding his arm dislocated, bruised. Jonah joined him. He's done, Mac said. Jonah nodded, but something tells me this isn't over. Mac looked at him. Maybe not. But for now, we won. They looked out over the valley. Wind in their faces, light on their backs. Jonah whispered, thank you for coming back for me. Mac smiled. I never left you. But, miles away, in a dark office in Washington, a man placed a photo on his desk. It was of Mac. The voice on the phone said, what do you want us to do? The man answered simply, clean up the mess. Jonah sat by the window of the small safe house apartment, staring at the street below. It had been 4 days since they brought down Langstrom, 4 days since they crushed Ghostwind, but he still couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, the other test subjects. The children in the clinic, the Ghostwind soldiers who looked just like him but had no names, no memories, no choices. He rubbed his arm. The mark was still there, the one Harris had spotted that day, the one that had changed everything. He wasn't just a janitor anymore, but he wasn't sure what he was. Now Mac stood in the hallway, watching Jonah. He looked older than before, Not because of time, but because of truth. Mac walked in quietly and handed him tea. Jonah didn't say anything. Mac sat beside him. "There's a storm coming," he said softly. "Langstrom had people in every department. Medical, military, even the press. He's gone, but his network isn't." Jonah finally looked up. "So what do we do now?" Mac didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he said, "We go public." Jonah's eyes widened. "You want to tell the world?" "I want the world to know what was done to you, to me, to all of us." Jonah looked down at his hands. "But they'll never believe it. I was just a janitor to them, a joke." Mac's voice was firm. "That's what makes the truth powerful." Back in Washington, D.C., in a dark room beneath a government building, the man with the photo leaned back. In his chair, he looked at the three men in suits standing before him. "We underestimated Jonah." One of the men shifted nervously. "He was supposed to be dead." The man at the desk nodded slowly. "He's not just alive, he's awake, and he knows too much." The second man leaned forward. "Do you want us to eliminate him?" The man at the desk smiled faintly. "No, not yet. People like him, if handled right, can be redirected." The third man frowned. "And if he can't be?" The smile disappeared. "Then we bury him. For real this time." The next day, Mac and Jonah met Lieutenant Harris at a quiet coffee shop in the countryside. Jonah wore a hoodie and kept his head down. Harris slid a folder across the table. "Langstrom had backup drives. Hidden, but before we shut down the system, I copied some files." Jonah opened the folder. Photos, names, test results, and a name he hadn't seen in years. Ava, his little sister. He froze. Mac leaned in. "You know her?" Jonah's voice broke. "She disappeared when I was 10. Langstrom said she died. In the fire." Harris shook his head. "She didn't. She was moved to another facility." Jonah's hands shook. "Where?" Meanwhile, in a lab hidden beneath a fake university in Berlin, a young woman sat in a glass room. She had long black hair, quiet eyes, and a scar across her temple. She stared at her reflection. Inside the room, a soft female voice spoke through a speaker. Subject: Ava Khan. "You hear me?" The woman didn't answer. The voice repeated, "Can you hear me?" Still no response, but her fingers tapped against the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound pattern repeated. Outside the room, 2 scientists watched nervously. "She's developing pattern memory." One whispered, "She shouldn't be able." 2, "We wiped everything? She's remembering." The other replied quietly, "It's beginning again." Jonah couldn't stop shaking. His sister alive. He stood up suddenly. "I have to go. I have to find her." Harris blocked him. "It's not that easy. She's in Berlin. The lab is government-protected, German and American." Jonah glared at him. "You think I care?" Mac put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll go, but not like amateurs. We do this right. Quiet, smart." Jonah's eyes filled with tears. "She was just a kid. She used to hold my hand when we walked to school. She was the only one who didn't laugh at me when I stuttered. I can't leave her in that place." Mac nodded. "Then we get her out." They spent the next 2 days planning. Harris worked contacts in Europe. Mac studied the blueprints of the facility. Jonah trained running, lifting, fighting, but his nightmares never stopped. He kept dreaming of Ava reaching out to him, but fading every time he touched her. Finally, the day came. They flew into Berlin under fake names, checked into a small hotel near the university. That night, as rain fell hard against the windows, Jonah stood by the door, dressed in black. Mac looked at him. "You ready?" Jonah didn't answer. He just nodded. The lab was heavily guarded. Biometric locks, cameras, silent alarms. But Mac knew how these systems worked. He'd designed them for Langstrom years ago. They entered through the boiler tunnels. Jonah's heart pounded as they passed long hallways of blinking lights and steel doors. Finally, they reached room 17B. Inside, through the one-way glass, Jonah saw her. Ava. She was sitting on the floor, humming softly. Jonah pressed his hand to the glass. "Ava." She looked up. Her eyes locked onto his. For a second. Just 1 second, something flashed across her face. Recognition, then screams. The alarms exploded. Guards rushed in. Mac shouted, "Plan B." They blasted the door open. Ava was screaming. Curled up in the corner, Jonah ran in, dropping to his knees. "Ava, it's me. It's Jonah." She looked at him. Tears rolled down her face. "Jonah," she whispered. He nodded, choking back sobs. "I'm here. I came back for you." They escaped into the storm. The lab went into lockdown. They didn't stop running until they reached the safe house outside the city. Ava hadn't spoken again. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. Mac made her tea. Jonah sat beside her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you." She looked at him slowly. "You did," she whispered. "You came back." That night, for the first time in years, Jonah slept without nightmares. But far away, back in Washington, the man at the desk listened to a report. "They've got the girl." He nodded, then picked up the phone. "Activate protocol Emberfall." The voice on the other end hesitated. "That's a scorched earth command. Are you sure?" The man's voice turned cold. "They want to expose the truth. Let them try." He hung up and stared at the screen. A photo of Ava and Jonah appeared. He smiled. "Let's see how far the janitor boy is willing to go." Berlin 2 days after the escape. Ava stood in front of the mirror, gently touching the scar on her temple. The small apartment they were hiding in was quiet, but inside her mind, a storm raged. Her memories were coming back slowly, painfully. Some were warm Jonah holding her hand, their mother brushing her hair before school, but others were dark cold rooms, needles, and the sound of metal doors closing. Behind her, Jonah watched silently. He had never seen her like this strong, but broken, free, but unsure. You used to love lemon cake, he said quietly. You cried when I stole your slice on your birthday. Ava's lips curled into a faint smile. And you cried when I punched you. They both laughed. The first real laugh in years, but the moment didn't last, because Mac walked in holding a tablet. His face was pale. We have a problem. The news spread fast. The Berlin lab was gone burned to the ground. The officials called it an accident, a gas leak, but Jonah, Mac, and Harris knew the truth. Someone wanted the evidence destroyed. Everything they had, the files, the data, the test results was gone. All except Ava. Jonah's fists clenched. They want to erase us again. Mac nodded. They've started Protocol Umbrella. Jonah looked confused. What's that? Harris spoke quietly. It's a global sweep. Any trace of the Ghostwind Project labs, doctors, subjects erased, clean, quiet, forever. Jonah's heart sank. They'll come for us. Mac locked eyes with him. They already are. That night, Jonah sat beside Ava on the balcony. The city lights below flickered in the distance. They won't stop, will they? Ava asked. No, Jonah said. But neither will we. She looked at him. I'm not who I used to be. I can feel it inside me, like something's broken. Jonah shook his head. You're stronger than you think. Ava touched his arm. You came for me. His eyes filled. I always would. The next morning, they packed everything and left. Their safe house was no longer safe. Mac had arranged a contact in Proximon, who could smuggle them across borders. But as they drove through the forested highway, a black SUV appeared behind them. Then another. And another. Hold on, Mac said. Stepping on the gas. Gunfire exploded. Jonah grabbed Ava and shielded her as bullets cracked the back window. The car swerved off the road, crashing into the trees. Mac was bleeding from the shoulder. Go, he shouted, get her out. Jonah grabbed Ava's hand and ran. Behind them, the SUV doors opened. Soldiers poured out, dressed in black, faces hidden. But Jonah didn't stop. He ran through the trees like he'd done as a boy, only now it was life and death. They hid in a barn, miles away. Mac caught up later, limping, pale, and weak. Jonah stitched his wound while Ava stood guard. They're not just after you now, Mac said through gritted teeth. They want her. She's the last piece. Jonah looked confused. She's not just a subject, Mac whispered. She's the cure. Jonah froze. What do you mean? Mac looked at Ava. She wasn't just tested. She survived something no one else did. She's immune. Her DNA holds answers. They want her blood. Not to destroy, to create more. Ava's face went white. I'm a blueprint, she whispered. Jonah stood up. Then we destroy the system before they get their hands on you. They made contact with the Prague team, a hacker named Lynn Young. Brilliant. Quiet offered help. She had one plan. Go live. Put her on camera. Let the world see her. Let her speak. Show the scar, the mark, the papers. They won't be able to bury the truth if the world watches. Jonah hesitated. They'll come faster. Mac nodded. But they'll have to do it in front of the world. Ava sat down. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. My name is Ava. I was taken when I was 8. I was part of a program called Ghostwind. They said they were saving us. But they turned us into numbers, experiments, weapons. Jonah stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. I am not a mistake. I'm not a monster. I'm a survivor. She held up her arm. The mark was clear now. A burned scar in the shape of a spiral Ghostwind symbol. I'm done hiding. Within 12 hours, the video had 17 million views. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Ghost, Win Truth. Hashtag Ava Lives. Hashtag Janitor revealed. People started digging. Journalists demanded answers. Former soldiers began to talk. Doctors who once feared speaking up started leaking files. The world was waking up, but so were the enemies. In a quiet meeting room at the Pentagon, the man with the scar paced angrily. She went public. With everything? One of the agents handed him a folder. She has support now. People believe her. The man crushed the folder in his hand. Then we remind them who's in control. He turned to the agent. Find Jonah. Find the girl. And the team moved again. This time, to a cold countryside monastery in Romania, hidden deep in the hills. They needed rest. Ava's health had started to slip. She was coughing, weak, dizzy. Jonah stayed beside her all night. Don't give up on me, he whispered. We just found each other. She smiled faintly. I'm not giving up. She took his hand. You were always my hero, even when you were just sweeping floors. Jonah cried quietly. I swept those floors because I thought I had nothing left, but I had you. That morning, Mac received a coded message. Someone from Langstrom's old team wanted to help. A woman named Dr. Eliza Merrick. She claimed to have the final Ghostwind server, the original unwiped. If you get me and the girl to Geneva, she said. In a call, I'll show the world everything. Names, projects, secrets. But Jonah knew it was a trap. Still, he looked at Ava. And said, "We're going." They boarded a private train that night hidden in the cargo section. Only Lynn, Harris, Mac, Ava, and Jonah. Every mile closer to Geneva meant more risk. Ava leaned on Jonah's shoulder, her breathing shallow. He watched her. Afraid. "Don't go," he whispered. She smiled weakly. "Not yet." Suddenly, the train screeched. Gunshots. Jonah looked outside the tiny window. Helicopters, soldiers rappelling down. He turned to Mac. "They found us." The last scene ends on Jonah gripping Ava's hand tightly as the door of the cargo train blasts open. Light floods in. Soldiers aim their weapons. But Jonah steps forward. Not afraid. Not anymore. The train car exploded into chaos. Flashlights, shouting, guns drawn. Jonah stood between Ava and the soldiers, his arms wide. "Don't move," a voice barked. But Jonah didn't flinch. "She's not a threat," he yelled. "She's a survivor." Behind him, Ava struggled to sit up. Her breaths were shallow. Sweat poured down her forehead. Mac gripped a pistol, but his hands trembled. "We have one shot at this," he whispered to Lynn, who was frantically trying to upload Ava's blood work to the cloud. Jonah locked eyes with the soldier who stepped in first. It was a Lieutenant Young, clean-shaven, eyes sharp but tired, and on Jonah's arm, the mark. The lieutenant froze. He looked at Jonah's face, then at Ava's, then the mark again. He took a breath and lowered his gun. "What are you doing?" one of the agents behind him shouted. The lieutenant turned. "She's one of us." The room went silent. The other soldiers hesitated. "What do you mean?" Jonah asked softly. The lieutenant stepped closer, pulling up his own sleeve. There, faded scarred, was the same spiral symbol, Ghostwind. "I was 10 when they took me. I escaped when I was 14. I thought I was the only one." Ava's eyes widened. "I remember you," she whispered. "Dimitri?" The lieutenant nodded, his face shaking. You protected me once. When they made me go in the cold tank, you gave me your coat." He dropped to his knees. "I thought you were dead." The soldiers stood frozen, watching the reunion unfold. Then, one by one, they started to lower their weapons. But outside on the roof of the train, things were not calm. A black helicopter hovered above. Inside, it was the man with the scar. Langstrom. Watching. "Furious. Cowards," he muttered. He lifted a small remote and pressed a button. Far ahead, on the railway bridge crossing the river into Geneva, the tracks began to shift. Back in the train, Mac received an alert. His tablet flashed red. "We're being rerouted," he said. "The bridge is sabotaged. If we keep going, we'll crash." Jonah turned to Lynn. "Can you override it?" "I can try, but I need time." "You've got 3 minutes." Ava, still lying weakly on the floor, pulled Jonah close. "If this is it, I just want you to know." "No," Jonah said. "It's not it." He kissed her forehead. "I didn't find you again, just to lose you now." Up front, the train sped toward the crumbling bridge. Mac climbed to the engine room, blood still seeping from his shoulder. He pulled the emergency brake, sparks flew. Wheels screeched. Jonah joined him, gripping the levers. Together, they slowed the train meter by meter, but the bridge was too close, too weak, too late. The front wheels touched the damaged section, the steel cracked, and the engine car tilted forward, but didn't fall, because behind it, the weight of the remaining cars pulled back just enough. The train jerked to a stop half off the broken bridge. Everyone inside tumbled, but they were alive, just barely. Jonah carried Ava off the train. Into the snow. The sun was rising. In the distance, Geneva, the city that could save them, or bury them, at a hidden lab provided by Lynn's underground network. Dr. Elisa Merrick finally arrived. A tall, composed woman in her 60s, former Ghostwind scientist whistleblower. She looked at Ava with a mix of guilt and awe. "You were never supposed to live," she said. Jonah nearly punched her, but she continued, "And that's why you matter." She pulled out a hard drive. "This contains every file, every experiment, every death. Yours, mine, all of it." Jonah asked, "Why now?" "Because I'm dying," she said. "And I won't die a coward." She turned to Ava. "Are you strong enough to tell the world?" Ava, now stabilized, stood up with help. "I've been silent too long." That night, Jonah and Ava appeared on a live stream broadcast watched by over 200 million people across the globe. Governments tried to block the stream, but Lynn rerouted it through thousands of channels. There was no stopping it. Jonah told his story. The janitor, the cover-up, the death of his parents, the scar. Ava told hers, the child taken, the needles, the rebirth. The Liza showed the proof. The world was stunned. Ghostwind was real, and so were its victims. Protests erupted. Investigations began. Former officials went into hiding. The man with the scar, Langstrom, vanished. But Ava didn't care about that, because now she had a voice and the world was listening. But just when it felt like peace had come, a noise outside. Gunfire. Explosions. The lab shook. Jonah grabbed Ava's hand. "No, no," Lynn screamed from the next room. "They found us again." A helicopter descended. Soldiers repelled. But these weren't from the army. These were mercenaries, paid to clean the last piece of the puzzle, to end Ava, to erase everything. Mac looked out the window. Grim. "We don't run this time," he said. We fight. Jonah handed Ava a USB drive. The whole truth is here. If I don't make it, get this out. Ava's hand trembled. Don't say that. Jonah looked her in the eye. This time, I'm not sweeping floors, I'm standing up. The episode ends with Jonah stepping out the front doors of the lab, holding a metal pipe, facing a full squad of armed men. Behind him, Mac and Dimitri. Follow. No armor. No backup. Just courage, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Cut to black. The cold wind rushed through the broken windows of the lab as Jonah stepped outside. The sky above was gray, heavy with clouds. In front of him stood 8 armed mercenaries in black. Guns, helmets, laser sights pointed straight at him. Jonah, an elderly janitor in a torn coat, didn't flinch. Behind him, Mac limped forward, clutching a wrench. Dimitri raised his hands, but stood tall. Inside the lab, Ava pressed the USB drive tightly to her chest. The truth was in her hands now. One of the mercenaries stepped forward. His voice came through a speaker. You don't have to die today. Hand over the girl. Jonah stared at him. I've cleaned blood off floors my whole life, some of it mine, some of it innocent, but I won't let yours mix with it today. The man raised his rifle. Last chance, old man. Jonah's hands tightened into fists. I've been underestimated all my life, but I'm not alone anymore. Suddenly, a flash from the rooftop. Lynn fired a shot from a drone sniper she had activated seconds earlier. One of the mercs dropped. Then Dimitri pulled a smoke canister from his belt. Boom! Smoke exploded around them. Gunfire erupted. Jonah grabbed a pipe and charged. He didn't move like an old man. He moved like someone who had carried pain in his bones for decades and was finally releasing it. Inside the lab, Ava sprinted through the back halls. Eliza Marek, the scientist, guided her to a hidden tunnel. Go, take the data to the embassy. There's a satellite link there. Once it's uploaded, they can't stop it. What about you? I have one last thing to do. Eliza turned away. Ava hesitated but ran. Outside, the smoke cleared. 3 mercenaries were down. 2 ran. The rest stood frozen as something unexpected happened. The local townspeople had arrived. They surrounded the lab with flashlights, bats, kitchen tools, whatever they could find. People who once ignored Jonah now stood to protect him. One woman shouted, "That's our janitor." An old man added, "He saved my grandson in the fire." Voices echoed, "He's the reason we're alive. Get out of our town." The remaining mercenaries realized it was over. They retreated. Helicopter blades chopped the air. Langstrom, the man with the scar, stood inside the chopper watching, burning with rage. Jonah looked up at him and raised his fist. Langstrom vanished into the clouds. At the Geneva embassy, Ava burst in bloody. Breathless. Security surrounded her, but the symbol on her arm stopped them. She held up the USB. This has everything. Within minutes, the files were uploaded, not just to one network, but to every major media platform. The names, the labs, the deaths. Everything. A week later, the world changed. Global leaders were forced to speak out. The Ghostwind project was confirmed. Arrests were made. Langstrom's private network collapsed, and a special hearing was set at the International Court of Justice. The courtroom was packed. Ava stood at the center. Next to her, Jonah, in a clean black suit, his janitor badge pinned proudly on his chest. He wasn't hiding anymore. A judge asked Ava, "Why did you risk your life to tell this story?" She looked at Jonah. "Because someone once told me I mattered when I didn't believe it." Then she faced the court. "And now I want the world to know. Even a girl born in a lab, even an old man with a mop can change everything." Applause. Tears. People stood. And for the first time in history, a janitor led a courtroom to its feet. Back in the small town, Jonah returned to the school where he used to clean. This time he wasn't pushing a cart. He was giving a talk. Kids sat, cross-legged on the floor, listening as he told his story. A boy raised his hand. "Mr. Jonah, were you ever afraid?" Jonah smiled. "Every single day. But how did you keep going?" Jonah looked at the boy. "Because someone had to clean up the mess. And sometimes, the ones no one sees are the ones who save everyone." Outside the school, a mural had been painted on the wall. It showed Jonah holding a mop in one hand and a torch in the other. Ava stood beside him, arms outstretched. Above it, bold letters read, "Truth cannot be erased." Years passed. Ava became a human rights speaker. Jonah opened a foundation for victims of illegal experiments. He never took money, only stories. He listened. He healed. And every time someone thanked him, he just smiled and said, "I'm just the janitor." But now, the world knew better. He was the one who cleaned up more than just floors. He cleaned up the lies.